Cool. Yeah. Hopefully this will be a good, accompaniment to your post-lunch nap. But maybe you'll, take away something from this. But yeah, we're going to talk about something very near and dear to me, which is team cultures. Because, it's one of those things that is pretty trivial because we're so immersed in them that we forget to critically evaluate them. And basically, this entire talk will hopefully give you some ideas on like what can we do about our team culture to engage our people more, to make sure that everyone's as creative as they can be, everyone's having as much fun as they can, but also making sure that we're still efficient and we're shipping stuff, which is no trivial task. So let's jump right in. And we're going to start with a notion that is pretty general, which is everyone is familiar with, which is, dedicated management exists because products don't ship otherwise, right? That's how we're basically, as a society, very used to thinking. Every business everywhere exists with a dedicated management layer, which is fascinating because it works. But in order to break any rule, really, you only need one example where that's not necessarily the case. And so that was the catalyst for this talk, is figuring out what is the dissonance between this general knowledge and then this one example that I was very familiar with, which is a little studio called Naughty Dog. And something fascinating about Naughty Dog is that Naughty Dog does not have any dedicated producers and managers, with a small caveat. But for a team of 300 people, at most, we had 2 production coordinators, which for an industry average of like a producer per 10 people is pretty much nothing. And something that I think is very interesting about this example is the consistency. Products are hard to ship. Some of them do, some of them don't. In fact, a lot of them don't. But Naughty Dog has been around for 33 years, shipped 19 games, and has been consistently putting out products with every console generation that have been somewhat well received. And so that amount of consistency, I think, definitely is enough to convince anyone that this is not a freak occurrence, that that's a system that has been working for longer than most systems that we're aware of. And so that is very interesting. And I think, as I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, the reason it's so important to explore is, and this is the old joke that I now put in every one of my presentations because I believe it's very valuable, is when we're surrounded by something, we're very easily conditioned to forget to critically evaluate it. And so just as 2 younger fish swimming in water pass by an older fish, the older fish goes, "Hey boys, how's the water?" The younger fish go, "What the hell's water?" And I think that is fundamentally how we operate in our daily lives a lot. When we are so submerged into something, we forget it's even there. And team cultures are one of those. Team structures are one of those. We're so used to the idea that, oh yeah, dedicated management is a thing, that all of a sudden we forget that maybe it isn't. And so this talk, in big way, is not actually to deter you off, dedicated management or anything like that. What we're actually going to try and do is we're going to try and have a conversation. Hopefully, if I can be of use to you with this talk, is by giving you ammunition to have a conversation, is by giving you some facts and by giving you some ideas where you can go back to your studio and talk together with your artists, with your programmers, designers, producers, animators, and see what works for you. What can you take away and apply to this? Because there's this gigantic, vast space that we're not exploring. There's your typical management structure, and then just the absolute free-for-all that is like Naughty Dog and Valve, and there's all the space in between that we're not talking about. And so hopefully we can cherry pick some of the ideas that will work for you and your specific company, and then you can apply those and try them out and see what they do for you. And especially, I think that is relevant in the face of the rising ridiculous cost of game development, because the teams tend to balloon bigger and bigger. And when your teams are around 6 to 8 to 900 people, the amount of structure and reports and just corralling of all of that substantially bites into your actual production time. So much work is actually just managing work. And there are more efficient ways to address some of that, and hopefully that is also one of the takeaways. And so we'll start right there at the beginning. As we've outlined, obviously, some studios manage to survive without dedicated management. Why does that happen? And I think the beginning is always with the people. It always starts with the individuals and how they operate, and especially if you were trying to transplant some of these ideas to an existing studio that did not operate under that model, you always need to start with the people, because no studio ever going to go, you know what, let's reduce all management and see what happens, because shit's going to explode. So you don't want that. But on an individual level, everybody fundamentally wants some form of creative ownership over the products that they're building, because we're all passionate and we all love what we do. And so that's where we have to start. And the barrier to this is fundamentally risk, right? The moment you introduce autonomy, what you're doing is you're introducing risk, which means there's cost that might not be made back, and that's scary when you're running a business. And so that risk, though, is fundamentally something that we can mitigate. And if we think about it from that direction, we can make positive steps towards engaging people more and making sure that we're not introducing more risk. And I think the way that happens is through ownership models. And we've already been through this before. You know, if you take your typical production as it sort of materialized in the industrialization process like early 20th century, when everybody just went to a factory and pushed a button, it was your typical, you know, carrot and stick model of you get paid, you know, for pressing a button, you get paid more, you press it harder. That's about it. But we've already learned that that does not work for creative industries. You cannot expect people to be more creative just because you're paying them more money. That has never worked, and something that we've discovered with that is that we're all driven by these fundamental questions, right? And the very basic question is, what do I do? I go to a factory, I pull a lever. That's about all I do. But when you ask a creative professional about their work, why they love doing what they're doing, they're actually going to tell you about how things work. And this is what fascinates them. We're all fascinated by building systems. As programmers, we're building systems. Artists are fascinated by how moss distributes itself on a rock and try to turn that into a system. You know, animators come up with systems. We're all fascinated by a particular process that we're trying to communicate to our audience. You know, use anatomy to make the most attractive character for a story. This is all just being fascinated by these subjects that we're all sort of so engrossed by. But then the question that begs itself is obviously, what is the next question? Where does this progress? And you find that the question is very simple. The question is, why do we do this? And I think for a lot of people, whenever they start asking themselves that, they all of a sudden find themselves being more involved with the overall product, which is very simple. There's nothing in a video game or any form of art really, commercial art at least, that's done quote unquote randomly. It all has a purpose, right? When you have a character, it serves the story, and the story defines certain features that need to be portrayed through a character. So what that essentially means is that the character artist cannot just willy-nilly go and make whatever he wants or whatever she wants. It has to adhere to a certain set of rules, which is essentially answering that question, why? Why is this character a certain way? And the moment you do that, the moment everybody on the team starts asking themselves why is what I'm doing a certain way, they fundamentally start asking themselves, what is our core product? What are we building? And what am I willing to sacrifice in some capacity in order to make it better? And I think the most perfect test of that you can find is whenever you have people on your team who have a discussion, usually you expect it to go like, you know, characters are fighting for characters, like, no, give us more memory, we need all the triangles, blah, blah, blah. And then environments go, no, we need more of the same resource. But whenever somebody actually relents and says, you know what? It would make a better game if the other discipline had this. Then all of a sudden you realize that your team is actually starting to mature around that concept of we're all building a game. We're not there to just build characters. We're not there to just build environments. We're not there to just put animations in. We're there to make a product together that's going to touch people, that's going to resonate, that's going to excite a lot of people and, you know, create a lot of great memories for them. And that is more important than your one character being the best thing in that game. And the moment you have that kind of awareness, all of a sudden, you know, your team starts sort of coalescing around your product more than their individual disciplines. And there are a few sort of principles or rules that help you with that. And the number one obviously being why, and that's specifically applied to individuals, right? When we're talking to people on the team as you're writing code or building your art or whatever else you're doing, it's always paramount to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Because not only does it give you more insight into how to do your job better, it also gives you more autonomy, which is a simple example, right? If a certain environment needs a certain shape language because narratively it's a dark and scary place, if the narrative changes, all of a sudden you have the autonomy to realize that the environment will change. So you put together more ideas on how we can improve this, you check in with the art director, creative director, you make it work, but you're proactive in that situation. You're gonna have to sit there and wait for someone to come and tell you what to do. You have the ownership over that situation, and that is very important. So in a way, demanding to know what are the reasons behind certain choices that are made on your team is very important, because this is going to be the first step in allowing you to have that autonomy and that ownership. And then from there, you know, when everybody's ready to sacrifice the one thing they love for something else that's going to make the overall product better, all of a sudden, everybody owes everyone to be on the top of their game, because we're all there putting our best into this. And what that means is all of a sudden everything is everyone's business. And that's very much how a company like Naughty Dog operates, where everyone is encouraged to give everyone feedback on any subject whatsoever, which means that you'll have a programmer at an artist's desk going, this looks like shit. And then they just have a conversation of, okay, how do we, what don't you like about this? But it's very easy to be an asshole when giving people feedback, especially if it's unsolicited. So that's a very delicate and tough process where a lot of people have to grow and learn how to do that. It's not easy. You have to remove yourself from that conversation, but how do you make sure that what you're suggesting is actually beneficial? And there is one very simple ironclad yardstick for making sure your feedback is good, and that is, does your feedback align with the why? Have you, that global why, that reason that you've agreed you're making all of this, does what you suggest make this better? And then if it does, if you can justify argumentatively how this makes it better, then all of a sudden there is no argument. You're just essentially proved that this is not a subjective idea that you like. This is an objective way to contribute to the overall product. And then when every conversation is structured around that, when everybody can give feedback to everyone, but the direction staff has done their job well in propagating that why, then all of a sudden the team itself can move forward and have these discussions and improve on the initial ideas. And yes, you'll get a slight divergence, but everyone's going to be moving in the same general direction instead of needing to be constantly corralled. So it's very important to do that. And once again, the bottom line is there that as long as you can add value, everything is your business. And you add value by adhering to the why. But something else that's very interesting is, and it requires a mental shift for a lot of people, is if you can give feedback to anyone, which sounds awesome, right? I'm just going to go and make an awesome game. Everybody can give feedback to you. And getting used to that idea that you're always vulnerable. Your work is always on display. People are always going to come to you asking you for things about your job that you presumably know more about. Is hard for some people, but fundamentally what happens is when you're exposed to so many great ideas from so many smart people at any video game studio, all of a sudden you find yourself learning a lot. Even if 8 out of 10 suggestions that people come at you with are not good, the other 2 are going to make your work better. And if you do care about the work, if you do care about the project, then that's all you need. You need an opportunity to grow, and that's how you do it, by being exposed to more information. So you need to be fine with that. And then the other part is obviously the communication aspect, right? When there's no producer to defer to and say, okay, you go talk to these people, all of a sudden it's your responsibility. That is your ownership in the project. Something's broken, get the fuck up from your chair and go talk to someone. You need someone's help, find someone and figure it out. But then when you engage constantly in that kind of conversation, all of a sudden the work flows faster. All of a sudden you can solve things on the spot. You don't need to call mom and dad to figure anything out. And the project just moves along better. And something that this also means is obviously everybody communicates with you even when you don't want to. When you're like, I want to be my headphones on, heads down, that is part of the bargain. If you want to have that creative ownership, you have to be available and you have to be ready to have discussions with people at all times, and you have to be happy to provide them with your take on it, your view. You have to be able to defend your work if you have to, or you have to be able to take the criticism if it makes your work better. So, and it's not trivial. Not a lot of game developers like to be extroverted and run around the studio and talk to everyone, but that is the price of that kind of conversation. That is the price of that kind of ownership. But whenever that occurs, something fascinating happens. Whenever the team on its own aligns itself with the overall goal, when the goal of every person on the team is the goal of the company, all of a sudden what you get is this uniform direction that does not require as much management overhead. And what happens then is fundamentally when you're running a business, it's a risk-cost proposition. Once you've reduced the risk, all of a sudden now you just have the cost of the overhead of management that can gradually be ramped down if that needs to happen. And so fundamentally the whole idea is, if you can create the kind of culture where everyone's behind the core idea of the project, then the project will move along on its own. And it will require some, corralling here and there, but it's going to be way less overhead than you're traditionally used to. But what that opens you up to, though, is very interesting, because when you have the team buy-in, when your team is on board with that, and they can operate more or less independently, then as a company, as a structure, you can actually encourage people to keep up that momentum and sort of more efficiently take advantage of that process. And there are a lot of also interesting principles that go into there, which the first one being is the same. When you're running a company, running a business, directing a project, if you're not communicating starting with the reasons for something, you're being inefficient fundamentally, because you basically, if you need to tell everyone exactly what to do, this model is not sustainable, this model is not scalable, especially when we're talking about big productions. When you tell people why something needs to be done, A, they have autonomy, but also they have way more time to think about this. As an art director working with 50 people, you have 5 minutes a day to think about any one level, while these people actually have, month. to think about it, and they will undoubtedly improve on whatever you thought is going to be the best solution for that space because they're passionate about it, they have ownership, and you've presumably hired people that are good at what they do. So trust them, get out of their way, and let them do their job. And something else that you'll find is that the best people that you're ever going to hire, they really don't care for, just being told the steps to replicate. People like creative problems. That's what they're there for. They want to be challenged. They want to be given a problem rather than a solution. And if you can structure your teamwork around that, if you can structure how your project operates by just making sure the problems propagate to everyone on the team, then you're going to get the most creative solutions, but also you're going to make your team the most creative, and you're going to get them excited to come into work every day, which is fantastic. The other thing that is not trivial and quite fascinating is the transparency. In order for this model to be efficient, in order for everyone to be able to give feedback to everyone at any given time, you have to be able to see other people's work, which is also not easy because a lot of people don't feel comfortable showing stuff that's not finished. But that fundamentally does not work with that concept, right? Everybody needs to be ready to have their work on display at any given time, and it's a cultural shift, but it's also a technological shift that's pretty straightforward to do, where like anytime somebody builds a level, it goes public, even if the assets weren't published. Anytime somebody adds an asset to an asset library, it's immediately visible to everyone. A new piece of concept art added, immediately visible to everyone. A new animation's being recorded. The play blast goes up somewhere on a server and emails go out, whatever. But these systems can actually allow everyone to have input where it matters. And then at that time, you still have the time and resources to adjust, to fix, to improve, and to take advantage of every single smart person in your team, on your company, that can actually contribute to this. And so definitely, absolutely indispensable aspect of that kind of autonomy is transparency. And then the other part is inclusivity, which is also something we strive for greatly. But I think it can be greatly summarized by just one sentence of, if somebody's part of the solution, they should be part of the discussion. It's very hard to care for hand-me-down work. When someone just goes in and tells you, we've talked about your work, we made all of the decision, and now you have to do A, B, and C, you're immediately getting like 60% output from that person because they no longer feel like it's their work, because all of a sudden they're not part of the discussion, they're not part of the solution, but they are part of the solution, which is bad, because fundamentally, even if it's a tough discussion, if you need to cut something, if you need to drastically redo something, 90% of people given the same information will make the same decision. And so give them the opportunity to make the right call on their own, involve them in the discussion, provide them with all of the information. Maybe they'll give you an idea you didn't even thought that was an option, because they're much closer to the work. But fundamentally, as long as you involve people at all times, even if there's nothing that they can fundamentally change in that conversation, they'll be thankful. They'll be grateful. They'll feel ownership. They'll feel like they're part of this, and they'll give you their all while working on it, instead of it feeling like hand-me-down work. And then this is an interesting one, potentially polarizing, but I think it's really important. I think fundamentally structure in any studio is in place to, once again, mitigate risk, which means that whenever you put a bunch of people in a room and you do a review, what you're saying is we want to make sure you're not fucking up somewhere, which is psychologically on some subconscious level is tricky. And something that we've noticed that absolutely has been a delight for me to explore is every time we hire a new person at Naughty Dog, they get a level to make, for example, and then sometimes their work is not being checked for a month because it's not the time or there are different priorities, but fundamentally, we do not check the work for the sake of it, right? You run with it, and then if something needs fixing, we'll come and talk to you. But the idea of that is that whenever you remove that structure, whenever you remove that constraint, all of a sudden the individual working on it goes, oh shit, if I don't make this awesome, it's just going to be garbage. Like, there's literally no one there standing over your shoulder and telling you what needs to be done. And then at that point, you feel that weight of responsibility, and people just get activated. It's so amazing to watch when all of a sudden they go, okay, I need to talk to my texture artist. Let's bring in the lighter. This looks flat. Oh, look at what these guys are doing with that other level. That looks cool. Let's steal some of their ideas. All of a sudden, the realization that no one is actually there to like stand behind your back and check on you every second energizes you to do better work, because all of a sudden you feel the ownership. It is up to you. And that is really fascinating. And I, once again, couldn't recommend this enough. Something that we do is minimize meetings as much as possible, minimize any of the standard procedures. If you need to talk to someone, just get up and talk to someone. And I think that kind of free structure allows people to feel more engaged with their work. But then obviously the question is, how do you make sure that it all doesn't go off the rails? And I think the approach that we've been applying is something we've actually been calling juggling, which I think is an apt metaphor, because what happens is your usual structure in a company fundamentally makes sure that we don't go left or right too much, right? That we're all going in the same direction. Where with juggling, what we're trying to do is we're trying to see what is most off the rails, and then we just kind of bounce it up. And then you look for the other thing that's most off the rails, and then you bounce that up. So some teams might not get any attention at all because they're doing a great job. So why the hell do you need to spend that time? You might swing by, sit down, talk to them a little bit, see how they're doing. But if they're doing great, if they're running with it, if they're improving on the why, if they're like clicking with what the project needs, then there's really no necessity to overburden them with structure. And so I think that is fundamentally the core difference in approaches that you can apply to your production, which is, are the things that we're implementing inherently bounds, or are they support? Are they pulling people up, or are they trying to kind of lock them in place? And I think it's very important to analyze, and there are different mechanisms that you can apply that are kind of along those lines that promote that kind of communication. And one of them being like something that we do routinely is like cross-disciplinary playthroughs, where we just all get into a room, designers, lighters, effects artists, and we just play the level, and then we just shout things on the screen that could be better, make a list, and then talk about it. And that feels a little bit less like a review, a little bit more like a conversation, but also that allows everyone equal input. If somebody on the texture side feels strongly about particles, they'll bring it up. If someone on the coding side has concerns, they'll bring it up. But it's more about being there together, being there collaboratively promoting communication and making sure that everyone's engaged, right? Everyone is part of conversation. It doesn't just happen with directors or leads. It is absolutely everyone. And then there are other things that I think other companies are doing that are really cool. For example, Pixar has an improvement day once a year that they do, which is fascinating. They literally just spend a day talking about the things they want to improve. They pre-organize it a little bit, breaking down into categories of the things they want to discuss. Then they all go into a room, they spend 3 hours discussing, and then they pick a point person that's going to drive that particular improvement that they talked about. But it all happens organically with the people, and you kind of allow the people to use their best judgment in doing their everyday work to determine the direction that they think some of the improvements should go, which is fantastic. And the other thing that I think Bungie's doing is they have something called planning days, where every 3-4 months they get together into a room as a team and just go, what do we want to accomplish in the next 3-4 months? And then they kind of build a small mental map, and then they check in with all the other departments who do the same, and they literally just spend that day resolving some of the things with other departments, whatever the dependencies are. And then that's the amount of organization that goes into it, and then just go back to their thing, and no one has to pre-plan it for them and give them a super detailed roadmap of every dependency slowly falling into place one after another. They can resolve it on their own as long as there's communication, as long as people are talking, which is great. Highly recommend. The other thing that is very interesting, but I think very effective at a place like Naughty Dog, no one has ever hired at a leadership position. Everyone who's ever been a leader or director at Naughty Dog has always gone all the way up from being an artist or a designer or a programmer, which I think has a significant impact on team culture, because all of a sudden you're not diluting that ownership from the team by saying, hey, let's bring someone from the outside who knows better than all of us here. And then by doing that, and in a lot of ways, everyone on the team feels like, okay, they know the person who's giving them feedback. They can relate. It's a much sort of tighter community around how the team operates and the project. So this is very valuable. And then the other thing I think that's been a great accidental find that worked out marvelously for us is Naughty Dog always had, historically, double for most of the sort of high-level decision-making position. There was always 2 presidents. There was always, a game director and a creative director in a pair. There's usually 2 art directors. Sometimes there's 2 leads. But the whole idea is that there is no ultimate decision-maker. Everyone's opinion is challenged, and it should be challenged at all times. The directors challenge each other. If an artist has an argument with the director and they don't agree, he can go to another director and have that conversation if some of those points are valid. But the whole idea is that you're just reinforcing in the mind of everyone that every idea is up for debate. That if you think you can improve the product, then talk about it. Make sure that it's out there. And finally, something that's been very valuable is everyone does hands-on work. From our co-president writing a lot of code to obviously the game directors doing design, creative directors doing writing, art directors actually making environments and shaders and writing code and whatever else. Fundamentally, what that does, it brings everyone closer to the team. The worst thing you can do while trying to support your team is actually detach yourself from it. If you're locked up somewhere in an office just, pooping ideas on everyone from the ivory tower, that's never great for anyone, because those ideas are going to be very hard to care for. When you're a part of the team, when the ideas come from the team, once again, the motivation is there, the ownership is there, the team feels like they're engaged, they're consulted, and they're part of it. obviously, in order for this to work, you need some really motivated people, which is really hard to find. And we do spend a lot of time recruiting because it's not easy. And I think the biggest thing for me has always been at every single interview, I'll always ask the person, why do they want to work with us? That is the biggest question that I can think of, not just because, that's how our company operates, but because you can teach people a lot of things. You can teach them how to write code if you need to. You can help them with their art. You cannot teach them to care about what they do. And this is going to be the fundamental difference between them applying that extra effort to communicate, to be out there, to be vulnerable, to do their absolute best to make the best game that they can. And so for me specifically, that's been absolutely paramount. And something that's very interesting, for example, we had our modeling test was notoriously time consuming. It was about 80 hours, and we've reduced it. We cut it down to about 10 hours. And then fascinatingly, the people who were taking that 10-hour test still put in 80 hours and just made it bigger and better every single time. And it was crazy because we were trying to save them some work, but fundamentally what they were doing is they were essentially projecting to us that they really want this particular job, right? When you go out of your way to, take 8 times as long on a test and make it really freaking awesome, then what you're actually saying is, I don't just need a modeling job. I want a job with you guys because I care about what you do. I align myself with the same why that you have. And we've found that the people that actually have gone that extra mile and spend 80 hours making a test statistically stuck with the company way longer because that's where they want to be. And I think is a very important question when you're running a company is asking yourself, why would someone come here? Do they just want a job, or do we have certain values that they can align themselves with, where they can say, no, I want to work with these guys specifically. I don't just need a job. I need a job with these guys because I think they're doing something that I would absolutely want to be doing. And so indispensable, once again, in building that kind of culture. This one is tricky, because something that you'll quickly find once you embrace this type of culture is quality stops being a variable. When everyone's so engaged, when they have so much ownership, and you tell them, hey, you know what, we don't have the time or the budget, this needs to be like about 60%, they'll just tell you to fuck off. Because they've spent all of their time on this, all of their energy. They're going to make it awesome, whatever it takes. And we did have people sneaking into the studio after gold master lock just to fix their stuff because they care so much. They don't, that's their baby, they've put all of them in there, and they're not going to sacrifice quality. And there's obviously a bit of a give and take, but there needs to be a realization all of a sudden that whenever you make this a priority, whenever you make a priority giving people that ownership, you have to realize that you have to respect their desire to do their absolute best because they cannot do a shitty job anymore. And sometimes that means letting them go too far. When you have wind simulated chest hair in Uncharted, that wasn't necessary per se, but someone did it and it was awesome because that signaled to the audience and to the team that we appreciate things like that. Or ants marching on trees in Horizon, like little things like that have an absolutely huge difference because even though they seem redundant, even though they seem like a waste, they're actually a huge investment in your team. First and foremost, because they now feel like their engagement and their commitment is paying off, like the team and the company appreciates their desire to make the absolute best thing. So you very much have to reconsider what you think waste is. And then the other aspect of this, obviously, is because you're communicating with problems and not solutions, you can and should at all times expect for people to come up with better solutions than you had. They have more time with it. They can toy around with different ideas. And then what fundamentally that means for you being a director, for example, is nothing will be done how you expected, but it should solve the problems that you put forward, and that should be the most important part. And a lot of the times it will be better. And then finally, something that's very interesting, and I think absolutely paramount once again is there's going to be breakdowns in communication 100%. When it's so free-flowing, when you have to get approval from anyone for anything, you're going to have 3 people starting on the same feature because they thought it was cool, and then a month later they're going to find out they wasted all of their time. And then there's going to be a big desire to start blocking these things off, saying, you know what, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? But I think there's a fundamental difference between a system that mitigates error and a system that maximizes result. And sometimes, in order to have the best possible result, you have to suffer some of that waste. Just because the moment you start closing things in and put in structures that are actually restrictive, all of a sudden you find yourself cutting off some of these opportunities for rapid advancement. Somebody had a brilliant idea and they might have not executed on it because they knew that they need to get approval from 10 different people. And that is horrible. That is a lost opportunity that you cannot get any other way. And so you sometimes will have to just bite the cost of it and, eat it when you have to, because overall you're going to raise the quality by having to take some more pain, and it's worth it. And then finally, something that's absolutely vital is the moment you give a lot of passionate people a lot of ownership, they will undoubtedly overwork themselves, and you cannot shy away from the responsibility of taking care of them. It's at that point you cannot consciously abuse that kind of commitment because people will absolutely just work their ass off. And so you have to make sure you use your typical levers for production and adjust scope where you can, add more time or add more people. But you have to be very conscious of that fact that everybody's given it their 150%, and if it is taken for granted, then people are going to stop doing that. And there will not be a team to do it again the next time. So you have to be very aware. And then, yeah, you're going to get some nice benefits out of that. So we've gone through the principles, obviously, for companies. And now just the sort of to sum it up a little bit, this will obviously improve quality. You know, on any given day, you're lucky if a person at work gives you 4 hours of high quality work and 4 hours of, you know, dicking around on Facebook. But when people are engaged, when people are excited, their output is just on a very basic level higher. They're excited to go into work. They can't wait to build stuff. They're passionate about it. And so that will absolutely help your business. And then same with reducing costs, right? When everyone's more efficient, you get more stuff done. And so that is important. On top of that, you're going to have happier people. Everyone's more excited to be at work because they feel like they're heard. They feel like they're part of the process. And that also means that less people leave, which means you have to spend less time training people, hiring people, and all of these are very tangible improvements. And, you know, just like Drake's chest hair, obviously the innovations are just going to come flowing, which is very valuable because when you get a bunch of people who want to be on top of their game, who want to do their absolute best work, they're going to find a way to push the envelope every single time, little by little, because that is also what they get off on, and they know that that is going to improve the product overall. So all of these benefits you get by introducing that culture, but also I think long term it reduces the risk in a way where if your team is aligned along one vision, if everybody understands that why, then even if something happens, right, you lose someone on the team, because the team is so on point and knows what to do, it's easier to carry on. No one person holds like the key to the studio, and if they leave, everything falls apart. Everybody knows how to carry the process forward. We're all in this together, and we're all sort of in this to make a great game. But when you start talking about how this applies to people, this is freaking hard. I'm not gonna lie or sugarcoat it or anything like that. This is a lot of freaking work. This is very different from how most studios might operate. It's about being vulnerable. It's about being there and discussing ideas and taking feedback from everyone. And you know what? You will get upset. It's not easy because you're gonna scrap a whole bunch of work because, you know, someone from QA had a brilliant idea on how to redo your entire level, and you'll do it because it's going to make the game better because you're there for the game. The other part of this is obviously you'll need to work on your communication skills. It's very easy to upset others in this environment because even though you're well-meaning and trying to make a better game, you might not word it the best way. And so it is a lot of hard work, but what happens is through all of that, through being exposed to that constant feedback from everyone at all times when they're so engaged in this, you will learn way more than you would otherwise doing your job because you're just bombarded by smart ideas, by smart people from all around you that you hopefully respect and they respect you. And what that means fundamentally is you will do your absolute best work because of that. This will make you better. It will be harder, but it will make you better. And that's the whole point of it. This is not a system to make things easier. This is not a system to minimize waste or error. This is a system to maximize result. And if this is what you care about, then you should probably consider some of these things. And then finally, you know, I get to travel a lot and talk to artists everywhere. And the one thing that always absolutely breaks my heart is I tend to find that a lot of artists or programmers, designers, whoever you take, they get disheartened by how their teams run a lot of the time to a point where they just sort of throw their hands up in the air and go, you know what, fuck it, I'm not even going to bother. I don't feel like I'm appreciated. And then fundamentally, they just, you know, they give you like half the output that they have, but they're not excited about their job anymore. And every one of us has spent so many years working our ass off, being passionate, being inspired, to arrive to a point where the way we run our teams sometimes absolutely decimate someone's desire and passion for their job. And that is horrible. And even if we can't sometimes change those structures of how our teams operate, I think that if you fundamentally apply some of these principles about trying to make the game better and not being an asshole about it, removing yourself from the conversation, being respectful, aligning yourself with the why, then fundamentally what that means is no one will ever, scold you for making the game better if you can justify it, if you can prove that you're adding value. And you owe it to yourself, because otherwise what happens is you're allowing other people to steal your passion, which I strongly implore you not to. And if there's one thing you take away from this conversation or this presentation, is that you do not need anyone's permission to care about what you do. So please don't let anyone take that away from you. Thank you so much. I think we might have a few minutes for questions, so the mic's right there if you want to ask some. Absolutely.
Hello? Okay. You mentioned that all your people, all the leadership positions start somewhere like, I don't know, juniors, specialists, whatever.
Yes.
Obviously, not every specialist is fit for a leadership position.
Absolutely.
But obviously, almost every junior or senior eventually wants to end up there, because that's, the logical way up. And how do you deal with, in this model, how do you deal with those who kind of get rejected in the process but are still doing a great job?
That happens sometimes, and honestly, I think the way this operates, once again, we don't shy away from having more than one lead if we have to, but the other part of this process is, I think it's all about creating value for the team, where there's a difference between doing a great job and actually having the team recognize that this person is helping everyone, because that is the fundamental difference that we're looking at, right? It's not just like, am I the best at this thing? Because as you've said, that has nothing to do with being a good lead. And so the people that actually have that kind of impact, where the whole team goes, yeah, you know what, that person is helping everyone, that is a much rarer find, where that is kind of the conversation that we have with the people, and there's sort of less of a line, I guess, in that particular aspect of it, where people recognize that they want to focus on their art a lot of the time, like people that are great, and they have that ownership at Naughty Dog, for example, where they don't have to feel like they're constantly being managed, because that's the other part of it, right? A lot of people want to sort of graduate to a certain level because they feel like it grants them some kind of freedom, but when you're literally like master and commander of your own shit, here's your level, you have 2 years, go make it, you feel a lot more like a lead, and you probably would be a lead in any other place. And so that allows them some peace of mind. That obviously doesn't work every time, and some people leave and they take lead jobs elsewhere, and that's the way it is. But for us, the fundamental principle is this person helping the whole team? And if that is the case, then we do our best to elevate them to a position where they can do that more consistently. But the other part that's very important, sorry, I'm just going to ramble on, but is that you don't really need to be a lead to do anything. Like, nothing comes with that position at Naughty Dog fundamentally. If you want to improve something, you just get off your ass. If you can convince the technical director that we need this feature and you're a texture artist, great, you've just done a lead's job fundamentally, and everyone is doing that at any given time. So people don't feel like there's an extra benefit apart from maybe some recognition, and potentially more, the only thing that changes, you might do some scheduling. Like that's a kind of a lame prize. So
okay, thanks.
That's about it. Yep, thank you. Hi.
I have a question about feedbacks. I really like this idea, but I have a question how not to get into a trap of getting contradicting feedbacks, and not to get into never-ending polishing and reworking stuff that's already done.
So fundamentally, a big part of this is up to the point who's doing the work, up to the person who's doing the work. And so basically the way this works is, if you can prove around the global why of like, if this is making things better, there's no contradiction. There's rarely a contradicting opinion. If there is a contradicting opinion, it means that it's more arbitrary. It means that it doesn't contribute to the why, and in that case, it's left to the person who's doing the job. So they have the domain expertise. They go, I'm going to build the thing that I'm more passionate about, because that's fundamentally the output you want from them. If there's like 5 things and you think that they arbitrarily, arguably contribute to the game the same amount, but they're different, then the person who does the work gets to pick, because we want them to be inspired doing it.
So the end decision is always on the side of the person who is doing the work.
Pretty much, unless there's some disagreement with like an art director or lead, but in that case, that is usually actually reinforced by the overall why. Like in that case, you can articulate why this is better for the game. If no one can articulate, then yeah, it's your call if you're doing the work.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
That was really inspiring.
Oh, well, thank you.
So thank you. It kind of reminds me a lot of stuff that the CEO of Supercell told how they work.
Huh?
And he also said that it's really good when it works, and it's really hard when it doesn't. So could you tell a little bit more about the moments where actually, I don't know, you guys get stuck or you end up into trouble, and what do you do then?
Absolutely. It's honestly, it's always down to the people. That's the amazing part, but it also at times is heartbreaking because yes, you get three people who had the absolute best intentions of like, let's make this awesome feature, improve something, and they literally just go off and work on it separately, and then they come together, and two of them have to be like, well, I guess we have to throw my work out now. And it is devastating for a lot of people, and the best thing you can do is actually articulate how it is important to have these situations because they allow us in the grander scheme to be able to act fast without needing to check with everyone 24/7 and have 25 approvals and stuff like that. And I think just that understanding where we know that we're going to incur some waste, you know, where we're going to have to suffer through some of that pain for a reason. There is a big why for that, helps people deal with that. But other than that, it's very much just on a personal level. And then you just do whatever you can to help that person of like, oh, is there something else they're excited to work on? Maybe we can, you know, see if we can readjust some of the timing for things and just help them be more excited. Because the other thing that we're trying to do when prioritizing work is asking ourselves, what is this person excited to work on? And the more we can provide them that opportunity, the more obviously they feel happy about their work. But just like, you know, just like with any game studio, sometimes entire games are canceled and they never see the light of day and people are sad. And that's kind of the I guess one of the unfortunate consequences of working in the games industry. But I think that when people are aligned behind why we're doing this, it makes it a little bit better. It's still not good. It still hurts, but you just suffer through it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi. My question is, because in order to create something, you have to concentrate, and the best efficiency is when you are in a flow state.
Yep.
But this kind of, let's say, management that you said suggests that everybody can just go to another person and distract them in any time.
Yep.
And sometimes, if you are working in an environment like that, your body learns that you can be distracted at any time, and it's hard to concentrate, even if you know that everybody said to you that nobody will distract you for a month. You will still feel distracted in this place. How do you deal with that?
Sure. Honestly, it's interesting. Some people get creative with like seat assignment where you just go, can I please sit in the corner? Like if I'm really far from everyone else, less people will talk to me. But honestly, I think the way this works is we have like ebbs and flows where there's parts of production where a lot of sort of this agile kind of information turnover needs to happen between a lot of people, and then for a week like they just constantly go back and forth and talk about things. But then there's like, you know, an ebb, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, we kind of resolved most of our conversations, now we can just focus on my level for a week. So it's a back and forth. You're definitely probably going to get distracted more, but I think once again, it's like that's the price you pay for that kind of approach, is you get to have the creative ownership and the ability to communicate with everyone, but you have to pay the price of being more distracted. But I think people learn to work with it, honestly. It's like we don't really have anyone who's suffering too much to a point where they're like, I can't be efficient at my job. We do have some programmers that have like earplugs and then noise canceling headphones on top, and they just pretend no one is there. But if something's really necessary, you still like tap on their shoulder like, so sorry dude, gotta talk to you, and you make it work. But it is tough.
So it is basically a mix of that's, let's say, schedule that people can expect. So there's time where they won't be distracted as much with hiring people that can handle this environment. Yes?
It's not even that. Like, it's up to the person. How? Because they say you're an artist, right? You manage your level, what needs to happen. And then you know that there's like a dependency approaching, like whatever, there's E3 in 3 months. You need to have all of the conversations, get them out of the way, and then you can work. So it's every single person kind of decides how they want to do it. If they want to talk to a person a day, they can do it. If they want to do all of the talking in one day and then work for the rest of the week, they can do that. So I guess it's up to the individual to manage their own time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course, thank you. Oh.
Just one question, okay? The last
Hey,
one.
thanks for the talk. You laid a really
pleasure.
nice vision, but I wonder whether you still have underperformers, and if so, how do you deal with them?
So that is interesting. We're obviously very privileged at Naughty Dog being the place where a lot of people want to work at. So the people who actually get there very rarely, because this system is kind of prone, potentially, if you don't communicate your whys well enough, both as a company and as a project, it can be prone to people just abusing it. But that pretty much was never the case because it takes so much work to actually get to Naughty Dog that no one's there just to dick around. Everyone's like, no, let me do some work. That's what I'm here for. But even then, fundamentally, thinking about any other place, right? Or, I mean, just like with any company, right? If someone's underperforming, we talk to them, we see what's the problem, then we figure out if there's a performance improvement plan, and then if that doesn't work out over 6 months, we unfortunately have to part ways. Like that's pretty much how any other company would address that. But I think there's an appreciation for the trust and the respect that people have where they know that because they're trusted, they actually want to work more because they appreciate that respect and trust that's given to them.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Yeah, I think
Oh.
that's all.
All right.
I
Thank
hope
you
so.
so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you coming out.